Hi, I'm Jim with Pour the Juice, and in this video, well, I have been tasting this old Fitz 7-year, and I figured why not start grading it. I figured this would be, a good comparison to my other graded videos. Those seem to go a little bit too long. They're a little bit convoluted. So I actually did my grading previous to this video. We'll see how that goes. If you watch my other videos, you know there's a few criteria that I go by to grade my whiskeys out of 100. There's flavor, there's nose, value, complexity, balance, and uniqueness. And some of those have different parts to them. So there's 4 parts to flavor, there's 2 parts to the nose of a whiskey. And I'll start by going through flavor first. There's pleasantness, intensity, finish, and viscosity are all the 4 different parts that I use to determine points to flavor. And at the end, it came out to 24.5 points out of 40 because they're all worth 10. So pleasantness, 7.5 out of 10. That essentially, to me, is just how pleasant a whiskey is on the palate. There was a slight bitterness to this at the end of the flavor, at the end of the palate. And that kind of lingered on to the finish. So that 7.5 pleasantness, also the finish was only a 6 out of 10, mainly because of that bitterness. And that's mostly what I get in the finish here. The finish is quite short. It's a little bit bitter. It's not terrible. So that's why I give it 6 out of 10 and not less than that. But yeah. As far as intensity, for a 100 proof whiskey, I did think it was quite intense on the palate. So for that, it's 7 out of 10. It's obviously not 120 proof or anything like that, but for 100 proof, there's a lot of flavor. Viscosity, I actually gave 4 out of 10 points to. And to me, what that means is a 5 out of 10 would be even. So a 5 out of 10 to me is like decent viscosity. To me, this is more watery than it is viscous. I wouldn't say... I would actually say that's the weakest point on this whiskey is the viscosity, because it is more watery than anything. Sorry about that. There's a fly around here somewhere. So flavor, 24.5 points out of 40. Onto nose, 2 parts of nose, pleasantness and intensity. It's 10 points out of 10 points for pleasantness, out of 5 points for intensity. Pleasantness gets 8 out of 10. It's a fantastic nose. I would say it's, apple and brown sugar and everything good. There's nothing bad in that nose. I would just say that it doesn't have all the extras to get above an 8 in that criteria. The downside on the nose is it's not very intense at all. And a lot of that's due to the 100 proof point that it comes in at. So I gave that a 2 out of 5 for intensity on the nose. So less than average, I would say, for 100 proof whiskey. Value, I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 15 total points. So 7.5 would be even value. It's not good value, it's not a bad value. I do think I bought this for 63 or so, plus change. For a 7-year whiskey, it is slightly higher value than just even, being that it's only 100 proof. Maybe not. Maybe that should actually go up. It is a wheated whiskey as well. Wheated bourbon. I'm going to go up 1 point on that, actually. I'm going to go up to a 9.5 out of 15 points. Complexity, I do give an 8 out of 10. I think the whiskey is quite complex, especially for only a 100 proof 7-year product. There's fruit in there. There's a ton of oak. There's different sugar components. You could even argue that there's different fruit components in there as well. and I really do think it's enjoyable. You know, I mentioned there's some apple in there. There's a decent amount of brown sugar. There is caramel. There's a ton of baking spice. So yeah, I would say, especially for 100 proof, that's, you know, it is quite complex of a whiskey, and at that price point too. But on the balance, or for complexity, I gave it 8 out of 10. I think I said that. Balance, I gave a 7.5 out of 10. And what's really taking points off of balance, or stopping it from getting to the kind of elite number level, is going to be that bitterness that kind of takes over at the end. It starts at the front of the palate and it lasts through the finish. And to me, it's a little overpowering in the whiskey. Everything else is fantastic. It's just that bitterness that kind of throws off the balance a little bit. So that was a 7.5. And uniqueness, I did give this a 9 out of 10 on uniqueness. The reason I did that is because I was trying to think. At first I was going to say, oh, it's not very unique at all. But then I started thinking about it, and I don't know of any other wheated bourbons that are bottled in bond besides Old Fitz. So there's however many years of Old Fitz. And those are all the same. Those are all wheated. They're all bottled in bond. But other than Old Fitzgerald, are there any other bottled in bond wheated whiskeys? I can't think of any. There might be a couple. I know Bardstown is like 96 proof. They're not bottled in bond though. So this may be one of, or the only mass-produced at least, whiskey on the market that is a wheated bourbon and also bottled in bond. And for that, I have to give it props. And so it gets that 9 out of 10 and uniqueness of a whiskey for me. And that brings us to the total. My total score out of 100 for this whiskey is going to be a 68.5 out of 100. So typically what I say is if it's scoring in the 80s, I would say buy and backup. 70s, I recommend to buy. 60s, I recommend to try it first before you buy. And for me, I definitely don't feel like I need a backup for this. When I'm done with this, I don't think I'm going to feel the need to go buy another one. You know, maybe if I need it for some videos. And that's not to say it's a bad whiskey, because I don't think it's a bad whiskey. I think it's a good whiskey. I just don't think it's good enough, I guess, to warrant the hype of going out and like ripping these things off the shelf because it's an Old Fitz product. But it is good. 68.5 is pretty close to 70. So if it was at 70, I would say, hey, go buy one. So, you know, if you're a big fan, you see it on the shelf, and you're like, hey, I just want to see what the hubbub's about, then I don't fault you. But that is my official score. So if you enjoyed my review video on Old Fitzgerald 7, please give me a like, please subscribe, and let me know what you think, you know, doing it this way compared to my last review, which I believe was the Jefferson's Cask Strength. If you like that format a little bit better, as I, you know, talking about it as I go through, as I'm grading here, or if you liked it better that I graded beforehand now and I'm coming to the table with a set number, I'd appreciate your feedback on it. Thanks for watching. Cheers.